Ready? I'm gonna put this on speaker view. Sarah, if more people come into the waiting room, can you just let them in? Thank you. All right, so hi, everybody. Welcome. I think it's about time we get started. So my name is Nancy, and I'm a member of Amplify Ryerson. I'm a third-year criminology student here at Ryerson University, and I'm going to be your moderator for the session. Please note for this session that your cameras and audio will be turned off. There will be audience Q&A towards the end of the session. You will see a button at the top of the video player that says Engage. Click on Engage to submit any questions you have for our speakers. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining us this morning. In this session, we'll be discussing the power of youth activism and how to mobilize that strength to create change on our campuses and in our communities. Our speakers today are Tyler Valiket, Chabu Kapumba, and Ashley Lynn. They will share, they'll each share an introduction with all of us. So I'll pass it off to Tyler to start.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name's Tyler. I'm the Associate Director at Future Majority. Future Majority, we're a Canadian nonpartisan nonprofit organization that works to amplify the voices of young Canadians into the political process. So what that means is we recruit and train organizers in important ridings on college and university campuses across the country. So essentially what we're trying to do is recruit young people, talk to them about the issues that are impacting their lives, and make sure that their voices are being heard by the politicians within their communities. My role at Future Majority, as I said, I'm the Associate Director. I've also been the Policy Director. I've been an organizer. I've been in charge of media. So I've had a number of different hats while working at Future Majority. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to everyone. So I'm going to pass it over to Chabut now for an introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chabu Kapumba. I am 19 and also based out of Toronto and a representative from Civics Unplugged along with Ashley. Civics Unplugged is an organization that focuses on systemic democracy reform, primarily in the US, but we are now expanding to kind of supporting high school students all over the world through our high school fellowship that kind of trains young people in the ways that they can be effective individuals, members of their communities, and also just looking at the world from a systemic point of view. So we have a number of different programs that kind of help support that alongside our fellowship and explore using tools like dialogue and sense making to make that all happen. I am lucky enough to have been a part of the fellowship and now also support the organization as a member of the empowerment crew. And I would love to pass it off to Ashley to kind of talk more about what we do.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Chabu. Hey, everyone. My name is Ashley Lynn. I am currently a high school senior based out of Vancouver, Washington in the US. So not as cool as Vancouver, BC. Yeah, like Chabu said, we are both founding fellows at Civics Unplugged and both kind of staying involved in the community and helping lead a variety of projects. Chabu also mentioned that we are a nonprofit, just really empowering Gen Zers to build the future of democracy. And so Chabu touched on our fellowship, which really helps young people find their unique role through a new approach to civic education that focuses on like systems thinking, personal development, democratic theory, and community building. And then the other kind of big part of our work is something called Civics 2030. Which is a campaign to fund Gen Z-led projects that build democracy and build community. And the Civics 2030 campaign is actually all led by young people. So by our, currently led by our founding fellows, but which, like the community is formed from the fellows of all of our graduating classes. Yeah, so excited to be here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, everybody, for kind of giving us a brief introduction about yourself and what you guys do. So we'll go into the panel now. So the first question that I have is, let me see here. So There is a systematic inequality built into Canada and America's political institutions, and many young people, especially from marginalized communities, don't see electoral politics as an effective way to make change. So what can political parties and politicians do to repair this erosion of trust? So I'm going to start this question off with Chabu, and then Ashley and Tyler, if you want to jump in at any point, feel free.
So thinking about this question in particular, what comes to mind is the fact that as a generation, we've been exposed to so many downfalls of our current democratic system. And so anything less than a higher standard isn't satisfactory to us. And so when it comes to kind of repairing that erosion of trust, it actually comes down to the fact that we're really interested and invested in genuine action that builds out tangible results, especially in the midst of things like the pandemic. You really get to test some of the proposals that have been presented by our heads of state and leaders and see the trickle-down effect that that has on actual communities and individuals. So primarily it comes down to the fact of whether or not we are able to see the action that is, joined with the kind of proposals and things that leaders mention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. Ashley or Tyler, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can share a few thoughts similar to what Chabu was saying. I think it begins with actually acknowledging that these systemic issues actually exist within our political institutions and our political systems. But beyond that, we need to see actual action from our politicians. Actions speak louder than words. It's nice that these issues are addressed or discussed during question period in Parliament, but we actually need to see some policy and some actual changes happening and to address these issues that are being brought up by younger generations. I think also one thing that politicians can do a better job of is actually going out and talking to young people, going to these communities and discussing some of these big issues that are impacting their lives. There's a lot of research that shows that if a young person, a high school student, has a positive interaction with a politician, actually gets to discuss some of the issues that are impacting their lives, or just talking about voting or politics in general, that can encourage further democratic participation, which can then lead to someone who's a voter for life, or someone who's engaging with politicians within their communities and telling them about the issues that are impacting their lives and their community members' lives. And then to kind of flip this question around a little bit and focus on young people, and something that Future Majority is trying to do is I think we need to continue to amplify the voices of young people, but also tell them and share with them that they are this powerful voting bloc, this powerful voting group within our country. And we know that they care about these issues around marginalization and systemic racism. And if we're able to just bring a few more of them into the voting system, into the political process, we're going to show politicians that they have power, and politicians are going to have to listen to these issues and then address some of these systemic barriers that exist within our system.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll quickly jump in here. I definitely agree with what both Taylor and Chabu have touched on. I think even in the way that the question is phrased, right? Like, what can our political parties and our political leaders do to like save our democracy? And I think like so much of that is really around empowering young people to lead and to take democracy into their own hands, and realize that young people have tremendous power to change our political culture, and really level up our political systems. And so much of that just starts in our own communities, it starts in your schools, it starts through engaging in dialogue, organizing your peers. And I think a lot of times like we put kind of like, I guess, like the responsibility for change onto adults, when in fact, like young people are actually the best people to be driving it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you all bring up like such a great points. Something about the younger generation is we're always kind of like looked down upon. We kind of are expected to kind of look up for change to happen when we have the ability to make that change for ourselves. So thank you so much to all of you for sharing. I was Great. So the next question I have is, what have you found are the most effective methods to convince and persuade young people that change is possible through voting and electoral politics? So Ashley, would you like to start?
Yeah, for sure. I think in terms of convincing young people what change is possible, I think so much of that kind of just starts with actually with not just seeing change happen, but being part of that process, right? I think democracy is a participatory activity. It's really not a spectator sport, and to kind of trust that change will happen kind of requires young people to kind of be part of driving that change. And so, I mean, I think it goes back to a lot of what has like what has been said, but I think so much of it is just, you know, having young people be kind of be part of driving that change every step of the way. So even if we don't get to that final result of like policy that is passed, like young people have still been part of driving that, and you know, understand how they might continue that work in the future to really achieve what they're looking for.
I think just to also like add to Ashley's point, I'd say that to just thinking about like all the issues and challenges we face as a society, like there's so many. I think that people are instinctually aware of the fact that to like say that voting would resolve every single one of them is an unrealistic expectation. And so I think that it's really, really important to have the conversation of like voting is integral to the process and so, so important, but it's also not the only thing you can do. And so putting it in the context of like other effective means of change paints a more realistic picture of like enacting something that will have long-term effects. Voting is just step one and one iteration of it. Investing in your community, taking up spaces in organizations like Future Majority or Civics Unplugged, all those things kind of help contribute to achieving the brighter vision. I think that to say that like voting is the one and only way kind of leads to a level of mistrust because our generations have again witnessed how it hasn't been as effective as we would hope.
Yeah, I think it's really important to build off of or to train young people to be effective organizers within their community so that they can be effectively organizing all year round, not just during elections. That way they can see that organizing can create change around strange parking laws within their community or around creating green development standards for their municipality, right? There's so many ways that young people can be engaged within the political system that can create positive change. But when it comes specifically to elections and democratic engagement, the way that Future Majority thinks about it is this sort of negative feedback loop that exists between politicians and young people, where politicians don't focus or talk to young people because they don't see them as a powerful voting force, or because young people don't vote in as high of numbers as other people. And then young people don't participate because they don't feel as though their issues are prioritized by young people. So we're trying to break that sort of feedback loop in the work that we're doing. And I think the first way of doing, or one effective way of bringing young people into the political process, is to approach them with a nonpartisan hat on. I can't tell you how many times like I've been on a campus or another organizer has been on a campus and they went to talk to a young person or a college or university student about politics, and when you first approach them, they're kind of like hesitant and scared of you because they're like, are you from like the Liberal Party or from the Conservative Party, any major party? And they don't want to talk to you at first. But when you say, I'm from Future Majority or Civics Unplugged, and I'm just here to talk to you about the issues that are impacting your lives, all these guards go down and people are happy to share and talk about issues like climate change or affordability or mental health. So I think it really does help to approach it in this nonpartisan way, but also reminding them that they have power that they're this large voting force. And if we can just increase a small percentage of voter turnout within specific ridings, every politician is going to be turning their heads and listening to young people. And I think it's just constantly reminding them that they have power, amplifying their voices and making young people the messenger in all of the work that we do.
Yes, thank you so much to all of you for those answers. It's really insightful to hear, what works and, what doesn't in ways of approaching like young people and how to really kind of get them engaged and get them to listen and, put their guard down and really see like the opportunities that they have out there. So with that being said, the next question is, what does mobilization look like in a digital age and in a pandemic? So this one is for you, Tyler. So Future Majority has some examples of targeting ridings that had a very small margin, but the youth vote tipped the scales. Can you tell us more about that? And then after, we'll pass it over to Ashley and Chabu and to ask like what mobilization looks like for you in the digital age.
Yeah, so Future Majority, we focus on important ridings. And when I say important ridings, these ridings are typically ridings that are decided by really small vote margins, around 1,000 or less votes in each election. And the reason why we do that is because, as I've said before, bringing just a few more young people into the electoral process and getting them to vote can tip the scales can be a game changer in these really tight elections. And we're not advocating for any specific party. We're nonpartisan. It doesn't matter how tight the race is between the top two candidates, but it does matter that it's a close race, because if we're organizing in Peterborough at Trent University and we're on that campus and we know that the election is going to come down to just a couple hundred votes, and we have 1,000 people on campus who are organized, ready to go, relationally organizing their friends, talking to their peers. What do you think is going to happen? The politicians are all going to come to Trent University and talk to the students there, listen to what they care about, and then prioritize those concerns within the election, but also after the election, because they know that that's a powerful group within their community. So we continue to organize within these important locations. In between elections, we continue to work advocacy campaigns within these ridings. And during the pandemic, we had to switch to a digital organizing model, even though our bread and butter is like talking to people face to face. And sort of what we realized is digital organizing can be really effective. And what we've done over the last year is we've held 30 digital town halls in these really important ridings. We've engaged over 26,000 young people within these 30 different town halls, again, elevating their concerns directly to ministers, MPs, MPPs, mayors, city councilors. And we've been continuing to put pressure on these politicians to create change on the issues that young people want to see. And it is effective, and we have seen digital organizing strategies work, including in our last campaign, we had the Minister of Health, Minister Haidu, agreed to make an inquiry about universal mental health care in Canada, and wrote directly to Prime Minister Trudeau, asking Prime Minister Trudeau to make that inquiry. So that's a huge win for our membership, for young people in general, and for Canadians. And a lot of it was just through these digital town halls, phone banking, relational organizing, house parties, and using different digital tactics.
Yeah, great. That is really interesting to hear. Like Future Majority has such a strong goal, and it's great to see what like you have held and what like successes you have drawn from that. So I'll pass it over to Ashley and Chabu to ask, like, what does mobilization look like for you in the digital age, and how has Civics Unplugged kind of approached these issues and barriers?
So Civics Unplugged actually identifies as a digital first community. So we have, throughout our entire fellowship and even through our current cohort and our existing community, we've never met in person, all of us. And so if anything, it's really shown like the capacity for change purely through digital means and how much we're able to achieve through that. And a big part of our priorities as an organization is ensuring that people stay entrenched in a community. And so as they're building out their Civics 2030 projects and, figuring out how they're going to support their democracy and their community in their own individual special ways. We have a continued community. So even post the fellowship, there are events that people can join. We have small groups called Junto, so you stay really connected to other like-minded democracy builders. And the whole point of that is really building a community that will support you in your long-term endeavors and systems change. And so building out this digital community has made it really, really easy to make those supportive communities accessible, irrespective of where you live. And this year we've branched out to having international fellows. And so now it's also provided an opportunity to gain the perspective of so many people and the different states of democracy around the world. So I think that being digital has so many advantages and by no means sets a limitation in terms of what mobilization could look like, especially in the context of the fact that like mobilization isn't like a momentary endeavor, like it's something that should be continued and ongoing and participatory.
Yeah, I really want to lean into that point about building digital communities and spaces where people. I think I don't know. I think a lot of times, kind of youth-centered advocacy and like activist organizations can feel, sometimes can be kind of incredibly pessimistic, kind of condescending, and I think it's just so important to kind of have spaces where young people feel like they belong, where they feel like they're cared for, and where they feel kind of like collective optimism and empathy empowered to actually create change. And so much of that is found in community. And so, like a lot of young people at Civics Unplugged actually describe the community as like a sanctuary. So in a world, that's so chaotic, CU is a space where young people can actually feel kind of seen and heard and have an inspiring vision for the future and like a group of other people who want to work towards that future with them, right? And I think it's just really powerful to find your people in the communities that that you're working with and that's actually making change.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. That's really interesting to hear. It's kind of hearing a movement that's kind of built on the digital platform, like, and never having met. Like I've always kind of heard the opposite, and a lot of organization have come like across a lot of barriers when it comes to that. But by no means has this stopped you, and it's, if anything, it's really fostering a great community online, which has not always, there's not really been many places where kind of groups can kind of come together and have like, hey, this is a community of youth led organizers and youth activists. So that's really interesting to hear. So my next question is, what needs to change to allow more young people to run for office? What are the socioeconomic factors that need to be considered in order to remove systematic barriers for marginalized youth? So if anybody wants to start, please take the stage.
I can get us started. I think that such a massive component of what it means to like pursue something like public office has to do with whether or not you feel like you have a valid perspective or involvement in anything related to democracy building. And so public office is almost like a culminating point of a much long-term involvement and investment in your community. And so I think that what would need to start is ensuring that every young person, irrespective of their background, or especially because of their background, feels like they have a valid, not only a stake in the issues that are going on, but then also ways to leverage their power. And so I think that if early on, whether it's like in your classroom or your school or within your school board, you have opportunities that allow you to not only witness issues, but then also address them in a way that's meaningful and effective, that level of understanding, like you can apply that to every context going forward, and then graduate to a situation where you feel like, running for public office is something that you're interested in doing. And so a big problem with that, though, is that a lot of times there are very few meaningful moments of contribution for young people. A lot of times they're in more tokenized situations. So we spoke to young people are present here, but did they really get to speak? Did they really have any control over the way that, policy was enacted here? And then even in that situation, the young people that are selected for those positions often fall into a very specific category. And so I think that it also requires assessment of like those who are, empowered to choose who gets to come to these conversations, being really cognizant of kind of the criteria that they set for young people.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think there's a lot going on with this question. I think one of the issues is just like party priorities, like political party priorities. I don't see them necessarily prioritizing young people as candidates. Young people don't have a lot of necessarily political capital yet, at least in the eyes of political parties. It also takes like a significant amount of money to run in an election. And I know that can be challenging for a lot of people, and a lot of young people who are trying to put themselves through school or working part-time in a gig economy. There's just a lot of economic and financial barriers to actually running in an election and running an effective campaign. So there's a lot of issues, I think, on the political side of things with parties, but also on the economic side of things that puts young people at a disadvantage, and that could be addressed within the way parties approach potential candidates. But I think one thing that Future Majority is trying to do constantly is just trying to equip our volunteers and our fellows and our members with the organizing skills that they need in order to be effective grassroots organizers or community organizers. And a lot of these skills are really transferable from community organizing to political organizing. And so as long as we're constantly working with young people, trying to level them up as organizers, I think we're going to see over time more young people running it for office and becoming political candidates. And another thing that we do that I think is important is we're working outside of major city centers. So there's a lot of democratic infrastructure built up within downtown Toronto and like Ottawa and Vancouver. But one thing that we prioritize doing is working more within the GTHA, within communities like Brampton and Mississauga and Whitby, all across this sort of area where there isn't that same sort of democratic infrastructure. And so what we're doing is we're engaging very diverse communities across the GTA, helping provide some trainings to level people up. And then hopefully those people will become effective community organizers and political organizers. So I think we can, what we really want to do is prioritize these different communities in more suburban and rural locations and equip the people and young people there with skills to become effective organizers.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think in kind of just adding on to what has been said, something else that I think about when it comes to kind of empowering more young people to run for office is just kind of like education. And I know that's like very broad, but ideally, like before anyone runs for office, they are good citizens. And I think the best place to practice citizenship is in our schools, right? Like our schools themselves are civic institutions, and yet we, tend to treat kids more like cellmates than citizens. I think there's a movement towards like more civic education, but investing in civic education, really means sharing power with students and letting them lead, starting like in our schools, taking ownership over their learning. And I think taking ownership at the smallest scales and practicing citizenship at the smallest scales is, really the best way to empower young people to kind of take that further.
Yeah, and that leads great. leads us right into our next question. So as we kind of in introductions already, so Civics Unplugged and Future Majority work with different age groups. So Civics Unplugged is engaging mostly with 14 to 18-year-olds, whereas Civics Unplugged, yeah, is engaging mostly with 14 to 18-year-olds, whereas Future Majority engages with mostly 18 to 34-year-olds. So you guys will probably have, a different perspective to answering this question, but how and when do we start teaching youth about democracy, and like how do we necessarily go about that, and at what levels do we kind of approach that and make those changes? And then along with that, kind of what impact do you think lowering the voting age would have on youth engagement?
So just kind of speaking from the perspective of Civics Unplugged, so much of why we kind of focus on young people, particularly students in high school, is because those are really like the pivotal points where people are really defining themselves and what they like to pursue and what their interests are. And if anything is like civics orientated is what they want, what they would prefer to pursue, it's really important that we kind of help set that important foundation, especially in democratic systems that are highly polarized by media and just like the way that we approach politics in general as a society right now. It's not conducive to change. And so I think that we have a real opportunity by kind of realigning the perspective of like how it is you engage in politics really early on, and then also creating experiences that show that things like working with a collective and investing in yourself as an individual and being a lifelong learner as like key components of engagement. I think it really sets the tone for good citizens going forward, great organizers later down the line. And then also whatever fields they may end up pursuing, they're coming from this kind of foundation or perspective of what it means to engage in the world in meaningful ways. So I think that starting early on really provides us with opportunities to kind of reframe around what it means to be a member of society in a way that resonates with what you do. So that's kind of why we start with an earlier age group.
Yeah, I think well, first of all, Chabu and Ashley, I believe, are 18, 17 years old. I think look at how educated and articulate they are on these issues. And I think that is actually very representative of high school students today in our country. The people who are leading the charge against climate change are the climate strikers. Young activists, high school activists in Canada, all across the world. We're seeing young people get more and more involved in the political process because they're worried about their future. They're worried about the future of our planet, and they're worried about the future of our country. From my perspective at Future Majority, I think some of our most engaged volunteers are high school students. I think, again, that's related to young people being really passionate about the state of our country. And I think we should be educating young people around the democratic process, around democracy in high school at a younger age. I think we need to revamp our civics classes. There's always room for improvement so that we're actually talking about the democratic process in an engaging way and bringing more young people into it and making it really exciting. And I think there's a lot of momentum right now in Canada about lowering the voting age to 16. There's a lot of groups who are doing work on this topic. There's conversations happening in the media and at the political level. And I think we're going to see continued momentum around this because young people are so passionate about the state of our democracy and the state of our world. And just a little sort of story. I talked about this subject on a radio show a couple months ago, and it was a call-in show in Nova Scotia, and people were calling in to give their opinions about lowering the voting age, and I was kind of terrified that people would be like, no way, no, young people they're not educated enough. But every single person who called into the show, and there was about 10 of them, supported lowering the voting age, and these were people from the East Coast, but also from all sorts of different age demographics. So I think people are picking up on this and know that young people are leading the charge when it comes to our democracy.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Yeah, no, like just hearing about voting, I don't like. I've always kind of wondered, before even getting involved with, amplifying the democratic engagement exchange, I never really saw the the power of my own vote. I never really looked to kind of like how to inform myself and like how am I gonna make a call for like the rest of the communities out there, like how does my vote count? But yeah, hearing all this has like and kind of like getting more involved with this has really kind of opened my eyes, and I really want to like kind of you know get even the people closest to me in my family who don't really are not that democratically engaged, to try to get them to see a different perspective. But yeah, thank you so much. With that being said, I'm gonna pass it off to Sarah for the audience Q&A.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Just for everyone's reference, my name is Sarah. I'm also a member of Amplify and currently a student at Ryerson University. So the first question is, someone's asking, what are some advice you would give to students who want to get involved in activism but don't really know where to get started or who to connect to? And I think anyone can answer this question.
I guess I will jump in here. I think one of the best things that you can do is to just find a community of people, whether that is Future Majority or Civics Unplugged. Like I know, like if you reach out to anyone at Civics Unplugged, like we would be happy to, hop on a call, see how we can kind of support you on your journey. But I know, I think the big thing to know is that this space is very much interconnected. Like young people want to support other young people, and you can always find someone to kind of go on this journey with. So it's definitely not an individual endeavor, and finding a community is really the best place to start.
And I would definitely also advocate for starting the learning process on your own. Obviously, that question's inspired by something that you would want to enact change on. And so as you're kind of looking for the right opportunity, also take the time to start reading books or just like taking the time to learn about that issue deeply, because when the opportunity, you also want to know what's the right opportunity for you to really enact change, what's the best leverage point within that system. And so starting your own learning process around that is an incredibly important first step.
Thank you all so much. So there's another question. So in regards to like lowering the voting age, do you think people would still make an informed vote? Should the voting age should be lowered? I hope I got the question right, but yeah.
I mean, I think so. I think everyone understands that there's a lot of responsibility in voting, in the sense that you need to, you should do some education on the issues that you're passionate about and where parties stand on those issues, and make an informed decision as to who you're going to support with your vote. Again, I think when we're having this conversation about lowering the voting age, it's important to center that young people are, like I said, I think some of the most participatory within our democracy when it comes to participating in activism and protests and talking about politics. There's a really good report by the Samara Center for Democracy that highlights the different ways that our young generation is actually more political than older generations. So I think there is already a lot of education that's happening, and that and young people will be very informed when they go to the polls. But again, I do think there's always room for improvement within our education system as well, and revamping our civics classes could be a good place to start. And there's also lots of organizations that are doing work. Like Civics is a NGO in Canada that works with high schools to put on mock elections and teach people about voting and the voting process. And there's a lot of good work being done by a lot of NGOs to educate young people that process.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. That's also a similar question to the previous one just asked. The question is, how do I make an informed vote? What outlets do you recommend looking at?
I think that it's a really difficult decision to make in terms of like what media to consume, because I don't know if there are any really healthy accesses to media that exist right now. Everything kind of has a way of like misconstruing the narrative that really doesn't help you as a voter. So I do want to say that like it's important to look at firsthand perspectives. So any kind of media that directly comes from the source of those who are experiencing it should be the priority. And then also there's a lot of validity in like lived experience. At the end of the day, you are existing within this system. You are intimately aware with more issues than you may think. And so I think just like reflecting on what are the things that you witness firsthand, that your family witnesses firsthand, what are things that are close to you as an individual, that's a really great starting point. I don't think there needs to be like extensive research that needs to go into it. At the end of the day, being here informs you a lot of what is needed, and that should be valued too.
I think something I'd add on to that is, like social media is a great platform to, draw awareness to issues, but like how deeply can you really understand something through like 6-second videos, right? And so I think it's like important to recognize that. And if you do come across something on social media that you want to learn more about, to actually find kind of like long form journalism or like slower media that allows you to dive deeper into the topic instead of kind of just trusting other people to make sense of information for you. Actually engage in the work yourself. And I think that's a really big part of using media the right way.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important to do your sort of due diligence when it comes to which media outlets you're reading and which ones you're trusting. I think it's important to read a lot of different perspectives in order to get an actual, like a solid perspective on where politicians or parties stand on an issue. I think it's also important to try to like engage with politicians if you're able to go to multiple different events. If they're holding some sort of digital town hall or some sort of event within your community, I think it's probably good to listen to what they have to say and make a decision based on some of the answers to questions that turn up in those settings. And then there's some cool tools out there that you can use as well. There's CBC's Vote Compass, which is pretty long form and maybe, yeah, it's great. And then there's also something that Future Majority did in the last election is we created a website, and you can check this out. It's called govotecanada.ca. We have a bunch of tools to inform you on the power of your vote, where parties stand on particular issues, and try to make an informed decision as to where and how and why to vote. So there are tools out there that can help educate you as well, and you can do a little searching for them, and I think it's useful.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. Those were some really good answers. So another question is, what other ways do I get my voice out there aside from voting? I'm shy and I don't really know how to organize.
I think that that's something that requires time to discover. So in the same way that like the world is constantly changing, the needs of organizations and organizers go beyond like taking to the street or being like a very like boisterous person who's okay with like talking to directly with politicians. There's so much more that goes into organizing. So I definitely would encourage you to get connected with a community or organization, and then feel your U-shaped, this is a phrase that we use at CU a lot, but like finding your U-shaped hole within the democratic space, because you definitely have talents and skill sets to lend to the cause, and it's just a matter of finding the right one.
Yeah, and just building off of that, I think in leadership and in organizing, leadership takes on different forms. There's no like one specific way a leader is supposed to look or behave. And I think I know with Future Majority, a lot of our volunteers who are involved have very different skill sets, and there's room for everyone, whether that's creating fun memes to put online or doing some strategy behind social media content, or whether that's asking questions directly to politicians during town halls or telling a really effective personal narrative. There's so many skill sets that can be utilized within organizing and that are important within organizing. So I think do some reflection on what are some of the big strongest skill sets you have, and then how they could be incorporated within some of these within Future Majority or Civics Unplugged or within other groups, because I guarantee you there's ways that you can contribute.
Okay, thank you so much for your response. Okay, last question. Can you engage democracy on a micro scale? Is that even a thing? And what does engaging democracy mean?
I love this question. I think it should be the first question we ask ourselves. How can I do this on a micro scale? Just like from a completely logical standpoint, to like scale up, you need the kind of skill sets and practice. So at Civics Unplugged, our fellowship is actually orientated around systems change, of course, but then also personal development. It's really, it's hard to describe how someone should be able to kind of change their communities and the world around them if they haven't taken the time to truly understand themselves and where their skills kind of lay and what they actually want out of this process. So I think that personal development is so integral to kind of looking at how you can enact change in communities, because once you have a true understanding of yourself, it's much easier to figure out how you can contribute in the best way. And so I also would invest in like the communities that you exist in right now. So your family is a community, it's a system that can be improved. Your friend groups, that's a community and a system that can be improved. Same goes for your school and your classroom. There are always challenges that can be addressed. And so kind of practicing those skill sets in those small spaces is important. And then graduating to kind of wider scales and spheres will naturally come with that. And those skills that you learn in small scale have application on a much wider scale.
Okay, if no one wants to add anything more to that, then I'm going to pass it back to Nancy.
Thanks, Sarah. And with that being said, it's nearly 11 o'clock. So that's all the time we have for the seminar. Please join me in thanking Tyler, Ashley, and Chabu for being here and taking the time out of their day to come and have this terrific discussion with us, a much needed one. And it's been fantastic to hear from all of you. So for everyone in the audience, we now have a 15-minute break. You can check out a seated stretch session with Christian in the main area on the event platform, or go stretch your legs and refill your coffee or your water. When we reconvene at 11:15 for our workshops, you'll be able to select your session from the left-hand side of the event platform. So with that being said, thanks again to all of our lovely speakers, and that concludes our session.